Okay, hello ladies and gentlemen, Forrest over here, and welcome back to another reading live stream. And tonight, I am going to be doing the penultimate part of reading Night Shift by Stephen King, which means that tomorrow I will be putting up a poll to determine what book I will be reading alongside The Hobbit after I finish this book. Um, I am very much looking forward to finally being able to say I'm done reading the book. I will say though, for the record, um, even though it's been kind of few and far in between with the reading streams and just streaming in general, with a bit of time by without anything going on my end. To put it simply, in case people are wondering what the hell is going on as far as that goes, I do want to address that real quick before we start with this book. For anybody that's wondering, Forrest, why are you not streaming as much as you were in like the first half of January? What the heck, man? Like, what's going on? To put it simply, I am starting to get to that point where I'm not really like it's stuff. It's more like I'm just not as energetic as I was. Primarily because of the 8 long shift days that I had to work with. Even with like the one or two, like when I had like one or two off days in between certain points of those back to back 8 hour, like those 8 back to back long hour days. Um, excuse me. So, to put it simply, I'm feeling a little bit tired, but I am thinking of doing something. I am thinking about taking something in regard to that, which I won't talk about because it's work related and not YouTube related. Um, to some degree, like I did say I'm going to be doing something, so hopefully, when I do that and everything is all fine and dandy, I will be able to get some of that energy back. That some of that energy that I've lost because of those long hour days that I've been working back. But that's then. This is now. For the time being, I'm probably gonna not stream as much just to kind of relax on my own time. Uh, because of that going on. But that doesn't mean that I'm not gonna stop for a long period. Like, I'm not gonna record. I'm not gonna do live streams for a long period of time. A few days is probably good enough, but but yeah. See, right now I am trying to ref- do live streams for everybody to the point where soon I will be doing a live stream involving the WWE Universe mode that I got going on. I already have the show set up. I just need to find the time to do it because I know that it's literally me doing commentary for a 1.5 to as long as a 3 hour show because I've seen how long those shows can last. Depending on what match, depending on the matches, how long the matches in themselves are, it could go either really quick or really long. So I'm trying to find the right time for me to do that, and it'll probably be tomorrow, but we'll see about that because I have 4 days off after tomorrow, but I might be doing some other stuff outside of my workplace that will require my attention during those times, but I still want to put time toward this. Also, I have not forgotten about about the games that I haven't played in a while. I haven't forgotten about Undertale. I haven't forgotten about Ace Attorney Investigations, Miles Edgeworth. I haven't forgotten about Spider-Man Miles Morales. All three of those games will be coming back soon. Don't worry. There will also be. I'm also until and I can't play anything on the Switch outside of the Mario Party Jamboree, um, Mario. Mario Party Superstars or Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, outside of those games, like anything that I was playing on the channel, Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, and the Mario Party games, Mario Party 1 and 2, to be more specific, and whatever else I was doing on there, I can't play those games right now because my Nintendo Online Plus Expansion Pass, I'm able to play online because I have the regular Nintendo Switch Online on, but I can't play the expansion pass stuff because I don't have it. Anything that was on the expansion pass, I can't play right now, and that does include the booster course pass for Mario Kart 8 Deluxe or any of the characters that were on there with the courses. I can't play that yet, but I'm hoping to try to get that situated soon. But for now, you guys will be seeing more of WWE 2K24 because 2K25 is coming soon. Undertale and Miles Edgeworth, and um, Miles Morales. All of those games will be coming back at some point here soon, but we'll see. But it's just up in the air of when they'll come back. But they will be back soon. I can tell you that. But with that being said, enough about the announcement. We've already got 6.5 minutes of an announcement right here. So let's go ahead and get started with Night Shift because that's what everybody is here to watch. So without further ado, let's begin. Starting with our first of two stories of the night, the last rung on the ladder. I got Katrina's letter yesterday, less than a week after my father and I got back from Los Angeles. It was addressed to Wilmington, Delaware, and I had moved twice since then. People around mo- People move around so much now, and it's funny how those crossed off addresses and change of address stickers can look like accusations. Her letter was rumpled and smudged, one of the corners dog-eared from handling. I read what was in it, and the next thing I knew, I was standing in the living room with the phone in my hand, getting ready to call Dad. I put the phone down with something like horror. He was an old man, and he'd had 2 heart attacks. Was I going to call him and tell him about Katrina's letter so soon after we'd been in L.A.? To do that might very well have killed him. So I didn't call, and I had no one I could tell. A thing like that letter, it's too personal to tell anyone except a wife or a very close friend. I haven't made many close friends in the last few years, and my wife Helen and I divorced in 1971. What we exchange now are Christmas cards. How are you? How's the job? Have a happy new year. I've been awake all night with Katrina's letter. She could have put it on a postcard. There was only a single sentence below the Dear Larry, but a sentence can mean enough. It can do enough. I remembered my dad on the plane, his face seeming old and wasted in the harsh sunlight at 18,000 feet as we went west from New York. We had just passed over Omaha, according to the pilot, and Dad said, "It's a lot further away than it looks, Larry." There was a heavy sadness in his voice that makes me uncomfortable because I couldn't understand. So it's more like, "It's a lot further away than it looks, Larry." There was a heavy sadness in his voice that made me uncomfortable because I couldn't understand it. I understood it better after getting Katrina's letter. We grew up 80 miles west of Omaha in a town called Hemingford home. My dad, my mom, my sister Katrina, and me. I was 2 years older than Katrina, whom everyone called Kitty. She was a beautiful child and a beautiful woman. Even at 8, the year of the incident in the barn, you could see that her corn silk hair was never going to darken and that those eyes would always be a dark Scandinavian blue. A look in those eyes and a man would be gone. I guess you'd say we grew up Hicks. My dad had 300 acres of flat, rich land, and he grew feed corn and raised cattle. Everybody just called it the home place. In those days, all the roads were dirt except Interstate 80 and Nebraska Route 96, and a trip to town was something you waited 3 days for. Nowadays, I'm one of the best independent corporation lawyers in America, so they tell me, and I'd have to admit for the sake of honesty that I think they're right. A president of a large company once introduced me to his board of directors as his hired gun. I wear expensive suits and my shoe leather is the best. I've got three assistants on full-time pay, and I can call in another dozen if I need them. But in those days, I walked up a dirt road to a one-room school with books tied in a belt over my shoulder, and Katrina walked with me. Sometimes in the spring we went barefoot. That was in the days before you couldn't get served in the diner or shop in a market unless you were wearing shoes. Later on, my mother died. Katrina and I were in high school up at Columbia City then, and 2 years after that, my dad lost the place and went to work selling tractors. It was the end of the family, although we didn't it did that didn't seem so bad then. Dad got along in his work, bought himself a dealership, and got tapped for a management position about 9 years ago. I got a football scholarship to the University of Nebraska and managed to learn something besides how to run the ball out of a slot right formation. And Katrina? But it's her I want to tell you about. It happened, the barn thing, one Saturday in early November. To tell you the truth, I can't pin down the actual year, but it was, but Ike was still president. Mom was at a bank fair in Columbia City, and Dad had gone over to our nearest neighbor's, and that was 7 miles away, to help the man fix a hay rake. There was supposed to be blind man on a hired man on the place, but he had never showed up that day, and my dad fired him not a month later. Dad left me a list of chores to do, and there were some for Kitty too, and told us not to go playing until they were all done. But that wasn't long. It was November, and by that time of year, the make or break time had gone past. We'd made it again that year. We wouldn't always. I remember that day very clearly. The sky was overcast, and while it wasn't cold, you could feel it wanting to be cold, wanting to get down to the business of frost and freeze, snow and sleet. The fields were stripped. The animals were sluggish and morose. There seemed to be funny little drafts in the house that had never been there before. On a day like that, the only really nice place to be was the barn. It was warm, filled with a pleasant mixed aroma of hay and fur and dung, and with the mysterious chuckling, cooing sounds of the barn swallows high up in the third loft. If you pricked your neck up, you could see the white November light coming ch- through the chinks in the roof and try to spell your name. It was a name that really only seemed agreeable on overcast autumn days. There was a ladder nailed to a crossbeam high up in the third loft, a ladder that went straight down the main barn floor. We were forbidden to climb on it because it was old and shaky. Dad had promised Mom 1,000 times that he would pull it down and put up a stronger one, but something else always seemed to come up when there was time. Helping a neighbor with his hay rake, for instance, and the hired man was just not working out. If you climbed up that rickety ladder, there were exactly 43 rungs, Kitty and I had counted them enough to know, you ended up on a beam that was 70 feet above the straw littered barn floor. And then if you edged out along the beam about 12 feet, your knees jittering, your ankle joints creaking, and your mouth dry and tasted like the used fuse, you stood over the hay mow, and then you would jump off the beam and fall 70 feet straight down, with a horrible, hilarious dying swoop into a huge soft bed of lush hay. It is a sweet smell, hay does, and you'll come to rest in that smell of reborn summer with your stomach left behind you way up there in the middle of the air, and you'd feel, well, like Lazarus must have felt. You had taken the fall and lived to tell the tale. I realized how off-centered I looked, so I fixed it up there. It was a forbidden sport, all right. If we had been caught, my mother would have shrieked blue murder, and my father would have laid on the strap, even at our advanced ages. Because of the latter, and because if you happened to lose your balance and topple from the beam before you had edged out over the loose fathoms of hay, you would fall to utter destruction on the hard planking of the barn floor. But the temptation was just too great. When the cats are away, well, you know how that one goes. The day started like all the others, a delicious feeling of dread mixed with anticipation. We stood at the foot of the ladder, looking at each other. Kitty's color was high, her eyes darker and more sparkling than ever. Dare you, I say, promptly from Kitty. Dares no first, promptly from me. Girls go before boys. Not if it's dangerous, she said, casting her eyes drawn down demurely, as if everybody didn't know she was the second biggest tomboy in Hemmingford. But that was all how she was about it. She would go, but she wouldn't go first. Okay, I said. Here I go. I was 10 that year, and thin as Scratch the Demon, about 90 pounds. Kitty was 8 and 20 pounds lighter. The latter always held us before, so we thought it would always hold us again, which is a philosophy that gets men and nations in trouble time after time. I could feel it that day, beginning to shimmy around a little bit in the dusty barn air, as I climbed higher and higher. As always, about halfway up, I entertained a vision of what would happen to me if it suddenly let go and gave up the ghost. But I kept going until I was able to clap my hands around the beam and boost myself up and look down. Kitty's face, turned up to watch me, was a small white oval. In her faded checkered shirt, in her faded checked shirt and blue denims, she looked like a doll. Above me, still higher, in the dusty reaches of the eaves, the swallows cooed mellowly. Again, by again, by rote. Hi down there! I called, my voice floating down to her on notes of chaff. Hi up there! I stood up, swayed back and forth a little. As always, there seemed suddenly to be strange currents in the air that had not existed down below. I could hear my own heartbeat as I began to inch along with my arms held out for balance. Once a swallow had swooped close by my head during this part of the adventure, and in drawing back I had almost lost my balance. I lived in fear of the same thing happening again. But not this time. At last I stood above the safety of the hay. Now looking down was not so much frightening as sensual. There was a moment of anticipation. Then I stepped off into space, holding my nose for effect, and as it always did, the sudden grip of gravity yanking me down brutally, excuse me, making me plummet, made me feel like yelling, "Oh, I'm sorry I made a mistake. Let me back up!" Then I hit the hay, shot into it like a projectile. Its sweet and dusty smell billowing up around me, still going down as if into heavy water, coming slowly to rest buried in the stuff. As always, I could feel a sneeze building up in my nose, and hear a frightened field mouse or two fleeing for a more serene section of the haymow, and feel, in that curious way, that I have been reborn. I remember Kitty telling me once that after diving into the hay, she felt fresh and new, like a baby. I shrugged it off at the time, sort of knowing what she meant, sort of not knowing, but since I got her letter, I think about that too. I climbed out of the hay, sort of swimming through it, until I could climb out onto the barn floor. I had hay down in, I had hay down my pants and down the back of my shirt. It was on my sneakers and sticking to my elbows. Hay seeds in my hair? You bet. She was halfway up the ladder by then, her gold pigtails bouncing against her shoulder blades, climbing through a dusty shaft of light. On other days that light might have been as bright as her hair, but on this day her pigtails had no competition. They were easily the most colorful thing up there. I remember feeling that I didn't like the way the ladder was swaying back and forth. It seemed like it had never been so loosey-goosey. Then she was on the beam, high above me. Now I was the small one. My face was the small white, upturned oval as her voice floated down on the errant chaff stirred up by my leap. Hi down there! Hi up there! She edged along the beam, and my heart loosened a little in my chest when I judged she was over the safety of the hay. It always did, although she was always more graceful than I was, and more athletic, if that doesn't sound like too strange a thing to say about your kid's sister. She stood, poising on the toes of her own low-topped heads, hands out in front of her, and then she swayed and swanned. Talk about things you can't forget, things you can't describe. Well, I can describe it in a way, but not in a way that will make you understand how beautiful that was, how perfect one of the few things in my life that seem utterly real, utterly true. No, I can't tell you like that. I don't have the skill with either my pen or my tongue. For a moment she seemed to hang in the air as if borne up by one of those mysterious updrafts that only existed in the third loft. A bright swallow with golden plumage such as Nebraska has never seen since. She was Kitty, my sister. Her arms swept behind her and her back arched, and how I loved her for that beat of time. Then she came down and plowed into the hay and out of sight. An explosion of chaff and giggles rose out of the hole she made. I had forgotten about how rickety the ladder had looked with her on it, and by the time she was out, I was halfway up again. I tried to swan myself, but the fear grabbed me the way it always did, and my swan turned into a cannonball. I think I never believed the hay was there the way Kitty believed it. How long did the game go on? Hard to tell. But I looked up some 10 or 12 times later and saw the light had changed. Our mom and dad were due back and we were all covered in chaff. As good as a sign of confession, we agreed on one more turn each. Going up first, I felt the ladder moving beneath me, and I could hear, very faintly, the whining rasp of old nails loosening up in the wood. And for the first time I was really actively scared. I think if I'd been closer to the bottom, I would have gone down and that would have been the end of it. But the beam was closer and seemed safer. 3 rungs from the top of the line of pulling nails grew louder, and I was suddenly pulled with terror, with the certainty that I had pushed it too far. Then I had the splintery beam in my hands, taking my weight off the ladder, and there was a cold, unpleasant sweat matting the twigs of hay to my forehead. The fun of the game was gone. I hurried out over the hay and dropped off. Even the pleasurable part of the drop was gone. Coming down, I imagined how I'd feel if that was solid barn plankton coming up to meet me instead of the yielding bits of the hay. I came out to the middle of the barn to see Kitty hurrying up the ladder. I called, "Hey, come down, it's not safe." "It'll hold me," she called back suddenly. "I'm lighter than you." "Kitty!" But that never got finished, because that was when the ladder let go. It went with a rotted, splintering crack. I cried out and Kitty screamed. She was about where I had been when I'd become convinced that I'd pressed my back too far. The rung she was standing on gave way, and then both sides of the ladder split. For a moment the ladder below her, which had broken entirely free, looked like a ponderous insect, a praying mantis or a ladybug, which had just decided to walk off. Then it toppled, hitting the barn floor with a flat clap that raised dust and caused the cows to moo worriedly. One of them kicked at its stall door. Kitty uttered a high, piercing scream. Larry! Larry! Help me! I knew what had to be done. I saw right away. I was terribly afraid but not quite scared out of my wits. She was better than 60 feet above me, her blue jean veins kicking wildly at the blank air, then barn swallows cooing above her. I was scared all right. And you know, I still can't watch a circus serial act, not even on TV. It makes my stomach feel weak. But I knew what had to be done. Kitty! I bawled up at her. Just hold still! Hold still! She obeyed me instantly. Her legs stopped kicking and she had hung straight down, her small hands clutching the last rung on the ragged end of the ladder like an acrobat whose trapeze had stopped. I ran to the haymow, clutched up a double handful of the stuff, ran back and dropped it. I went back again, and again, and again. I really don't remember it after that, except that hay got up my nose, and I started sneezing and couldn't stop. I ran back and forth, building a haystack where the floor of the ladder had been, where the foot of the ladder had been. It was a very small haystack. Looking at it, then looking at her hanging so far above it, you might have thought of one of those cartoons where the guy jumps 300 feet into a water glass. Back and forth, back and forth. Mary, I can't hold on much longer. Her voice was high and despairing. Kitty, you've got to! You've got to hold on! Back and forth, hay down my shirt. Back and forth. The haystack was as high as my chin now, but the hay mow we had been diving into was 25 feet deep. I thought that if she only broke her legs, it would be getting off cheap. And I knew if she missed the hay altogether, she would be killed. Back and forth. Barry! The run! It's letting go! I could hear the steady, rasping cry of the rung pulling free under her weight. Her legs began to kick again in panic, but if she was thrashing like that, she would surely miss the hay. No! I yelled. No! Stop that! Just let go! Let go, Kitty! Because it was too late for me to get any more hay. Too late for anything except blind hope. She let go and dropped the second I told her to. She came straight down like a knife. It seemed to me that she dropped forever, her gold pigtail standing straight up from her head, her eyes shut, her face as pale as china. She didn't scream. Her hands were locked in front of her lips as if she was praying. And she struck the hay right in the center. She went down out of sight in it. Hay flew up all around as if a shell had struck, and I heard the thump of her body hitting the boards. The sound, a loud thud, sent a deadly chill into me. It had been too loud, much too loud, but I had to see. Starting to cry, I pounced on the haystack and pulled it apart, flinging the straw behind me in great handfuls. A blue jean leg came to light, then a plaid shirt, and then Kitty's face. It was dreadfully pale and her eyes went shut. She was dead. I knew it as I looked at her. The world went gray for me. November gray. The only things in it with any color were her pigtails, bright gold. And then the deep blue of her irises as she opened her eyes. Kitty? My voice was hoarse, husky, unbelieving. My throat was coated with hay chaff. Kitty? Larry? She asked, bewildered. Am I alive? I picked her out of the hay and hugged her, and she put her arms around my neck and hugged me back. You're alive, I said. You're alive! You're alive! You gotta call it for what it is. She was very lucky to be alive after dealing with a fall like that. Because a fall like that, depending on how a person lands on a fall like that could either severely injure you, or probably at her age, if she landed awkwardly in such a way, or like if she landed in such an awkward way, she probably would have died. But since she survived it, since she should just consider herself lucky. I'm being honest. She had broken her left ankle, and that was all. When Dr. Peterson, the GP from Columbia City, came out to the barn with my father and me, he looked up into the shadows for a long time. The last rung on the ladder still hung there, aslant from one nail. He looked, as I said, for a long time. A miracle, he said to my father, and then took disdainfully at the hay I'd put down. He went out to his dusty DeSoto and drove away. My father's hand came down on my shoulder. We're going to the woodshed, Larry, he said in a very calm voice. I believe you know what's going to happen there. Yes, sir, I whispered. Every time I whack you, Larry, I want you to thank God your sister is still alive. Yes, sir. Then we went. He whacked me plenty of times. So many times I ate standing up for a week and with a cushion on my chair for 2 weeks after that. And every time he whacked me with his big red calloused hand, I thanked God. In a loud, loud voice, by the last 2 or 3 whacks, I was pretty sure he was hearing me. That's he with a capital H, by the way. He let me in to see her just before bedtime. There was a catbird outside her window. I remember that. Her floor all wrapped up was her foot all wrapped up was propped on a board. She looked at me so long and so lovingly that I was uncomfortable. Then she said, Hey, you put down hay. Of course I did, I blurted. What else would I do? Once the ladder broke, there was no way to get up there. I didn't know what you were doing, she said. You must have. I was right under you for Christ's sake. I didn't dare look down, she said. I was too scared. I had my eyes shut the whole time. I stared at her, thunderstruck. You didn't know? Didn't know what I was doing? She shook her head. And when I told you to let go, you just did it? She nodded. Kitty, how could you do that? She looked at me with those deep blue eyes. I knew you must have been doing something to fix it, she said. You're my big brother. I know you'd take care of me. Oh, Kitty, you don't know how close it was. I had put my hand over my face. She sat up, took them away. She kissed my cheek. No, she said, but I knew you were down there. Gee, am I sleepy. I'll see you tomorrow, Mary. I'm going to have a cast. Dr. Pedersen says. She had the cast on for a little less than a month, and all her classmates signed it. She even got me to sign it. And when it came off, that was the end of the barn incident. My father replaced the ladder up to the third loft with a new strong one, but I never climbed up to the beam and jumped off into the hay mow again. So far as I knew, so far as I know, Kitty didn't either. It was the end, but somehow not the end. Somehow it never ended until 9 days ago when Kitty jumped from the top story of an insurance building in Los Angeles. I have the clipping from the LA Times in my wallet. I guess I'll always carry it, but not in the good way you carry snapshots of people you want to remember, or theater tickets from a really good show, or part of the program from a World Series game. I carry the clipping the way you carry something heavy, because carrying it is your work. The headline reads, Tall girl swan dives to her death. We grew up. That's all I know, other than facts that don't mean anything. She was going to go to business college in Omaha, but in the summer after she graduated from high school, she won a beauty contest and married one of the judges. It sounds like a dirty joke, doesn't it? My pity. While I was in law school, she got divorced and wrote me a long letter, 10 pages or so, 10 pages or more, telling me how it had been, how messy it had been, how it might have been better if she could have had a child. She asked me if I could come, but losing a week in law school is like losing a term in liberal arts undergraduate. Those guys are greyhounds. If you lose sight of the little mechanical rabbit, it's gone forever. She moved to LA and got married again. When that one broke up, I was out of law school. There was another letter, a shorter one, more bitter. She was never going to get stuck on that merry-go-round, she told me. It was a fixed job. The only way you could catch the brass ring was to tumble off the horse and crack your skull. If that was what the price of a free ride was, who wanted it? P.S. Can you come, Larry? It's been a while. I wrote back and told her that I'd love to come, but I couldn't. I had landed a job in a high-pressure firm, low guy on the totem pole, all the work and none of the credit. If I was going to make it up to the next step, it would have to be that year. That was my long letter, and it was all about my career. I answered all of her letters, but I could never really believe that it was really Kitty who was writing them. More than no more than I could really believe that the hay was really there, until it broke my fall at the bottom of the drop and saved my life. I couldn't believe that my sister and the beaten woman who signed Kitty in a circle at the bottom of her letters were really the same person. My sister was a girl with pigtails, still without breasts. She was the one who stopped writing. I got Christmas cards, birthday cards, and my wife would reciprocate. Then we got divorced and I moved and just forgot. The next Christmas and the birthday after, the cards came through the forwarding address. The first one. And I kept thinking, gee, I've got to write Kitty and tell her that I moved. But I never did. But as I told you, those are facts that don't mean anything. The only things that matter are that we grew up and she swanned from that insurance building, and that Kitty was the one who always believed the hay would be there. Kitty was the one who had said, I knew you must be doing something to fix it. Those things matter. And Kitty's letter. People move around so much now, and it's funny how those crossed off addresses and change of address stickers can look like accusations. She'd printed her return address in the upper left corner of the envelope, the place she'd been staying at until she jumped. A very nice apartment building on Van Nuys. Dad and I went there to pick up her things. The landlady was nice. She had liked Kitty. The letter was postmarked 2 weeks before she died. It would have gotten to me a long time before, if not for the forwarding addresses. She must have gotten tired of waiting. Dear Larry, I've been thinking about it a lot lately, and what I've decided is that it would have been better for me if that last drum had broken before you could put the hay down. Your Kitty. Yes, I guess she must have gotten tired of waiting. I'd rather believe that than think of her deciding I must have forgotten. I wouldn't want her to think that, because that one sentence was maybe the only thing that would have brought me on the run. But not even that is the reason sleep comes so hard now. When I close my eyes and start to drift off, I see her coming down from the third loft, her eyes wide and dark blue, her body arched, her arms swept up behind her. She was the one who always knew that hay would be there. And that was the last rung on the ladder. I think we can all agree that is probably one of, if not the most somber endings to a Stephen King story, short or novel sized. They all because of how we look back at this memory of his that he has, and at that point we're thinking of, well, he did a good deed. He did the right thing. He did what was best for his sister. But then it gets to that point that I just read with the letter that she sends the main character, and she believes that she believes in that letter that he did the wrong thing. It's such a sad thing to it to it, to experience, because obviously it's like in this situation he gets the letter after the deed was done, because he gets the newspaper clipping and then her letter. That's what the ending is basically saying. He was able to save her before, but this time he wasn't able to save her like he did. And I feel like that's the moral of the story. We always want to try to help people in any way that we possibly can, but we are not always able to do it for one reason or another. I feel like that's the whole point of the story when now that I'm thinking about it. Because, like I said, we all want to help the people that we all care about in our lives very, very much. But there is probably going to be that time where we're not going to be able to help them out. And so something like this could happen. I say could because you just never know. It could happen, but we never know if it actually will happen. And we don't want to think that it will happen. I know that we're having a very deep. I know that I'm having like a very deep thought process with this story, but that's what I feel like this story was about. So yeah, this is like one of those stories where after reading it, you kind of just want to let the people that are in your life personally or online, and let them know how much you matter to them. That's what this story is making me. Is That's what it feels like with this story, you know. Now, as much as I would love to continue, as much as I would love to, well, I don't want to say love, but as much as I would like to continue the conversation, we have to move on because, as per usual, with the style of the stories, with how I do these episode, this part, I've made it to where I do two stories. So, you guys think about what I just said, and I will have to move on to this next story, which is a very short story, by the way. Like literally, the page it's like that many pages long when it comes to like the page flips. So yeah, Our second story for this part is titled The Man Who Loved Flowers. On an early evening in May of 1963, a young man with his hand in his pocket walked briskly up New York's Third Avenue. The air was soft and beautiful. The sky was darkened by snow debris from blue to the calm and lovely violet of dusk. There are people who love the city, and this was one of the nights that made them love it. Everyone standing in the doorways of the delicatessens and dry cleaning shops and restaurants seemed to be smiling. An old lady pushing two bags of groceries in an old baby pram grinned at the young man and hailed him. Hey, beautiful! The young man gave her a half smile and raised his hand in a wave. She passed on her way, thinking, he's in love. He had that look about him. He was dressed in a light gray suit, the narrow tie pulled down a little, his top collar buttons undone. His hair was dark and cut short. His complexion was fair, his eyes a light blue. Not an extraordinary face, but on this soft spring evening, on this avenue, in May of 1963, he was beautiful, and the old woman found herself thinking, with a moment's sweet nostalgia, that in spring anyone could be beautiful, if they're hurrying to meet the one of their dreams for dinner, and maybe dancing after. Spring is the only season when nostalgia never seems to turn bitter, and she went on her way glad that she had spoken to him, and glad he had returned the compliment by raising his hand in half salute. The young man crossed 63rd Street, walking with a bounce in his step and that same half smile on his lips. Partway up the block, an old man stood beside a chipped green hand cart filled with flowers. The predominant color was yellow, a yellow fever of jonquils and late crocuses. The man also had carnations and a few hothouse tea roses, mostly yellow and white. He was eating a pretzel and listening to a bulky transistor radio that was sitting kitty corner on his handcart. The radio poured out bad news that no one listened to a hammer murderer while it was still on the loose. JFK had declared that the situation in a little Asian country called Vietnam, Vietnam as the guy read it, Viet, 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 Vietnam as the guy reading the news called it, would bear watching. An unidentified woman had been pulled from the East River. A grand jury had failed to indict a crime overlord in the current city administration's war on heroin. The Russians had exploded a nuclear device. None of it seemed real. None of it seemed to matter. The air was soft and sweet. Two men with beer bellies stood outside a bakery, pitching nickels and ribbing each other. Spring trembled on the edge of summer, and in the city, summer is the season of dreams. The young man passed the flower stand, and the sound of the bad news faded. He hesitated, looked over his shoulder, and thought it over. He reached into his coat pocket and touched the something in there again. For a moment his face seemed puzzled, lonely, almost haunted, and then, as his hand left the pocket, it regained its former expression of eager expectation. He turned back to the flower stand, smiling. He would bring her some flowers. That would please her. He loved to see her eyes light up with surprise and joy when he brought her a surprise. Little things, because he was far from rich. A box of candy, a bracelet, once only a bag of Valencia oranges, because he knew they were Norma's favorite. My young friend, the flower vendor said, as the man in the gray suit came back, running his eyes over the stock in the handcart. The vendor was maybe 68, wearing a torn gray knitted sweater and a sock cap in spite of the warmth of the evening. His face was a map of wrinkles. His eyes were deep in pouches, and a cigarette jittered between his fingers. But he also remembered how it was to be young in the spring, young and so much in love that you practically zoomed everywhere. The vendor's face was normally sour, but now he smiled a little, just as the old woman pushing the groceries had, because this time was such an obvious case. He brushed pretzel crumbs from the front of his baggy sweater, and thought, if this kid were sick, they'd have him in intensive care right now. How much are your flowers? The young man asked. I'll make you a nice bouquet for $1. These 10 roses, they're hot house. Cost a little more, 70 cents apiece. I sell you half a dozen for $3.50. Expensive, the young man said. Nothing good comes cheap, my young friend. Didn't your mother ever teach you that? The young man grinned. She might have mentioned it at that. Sure, sure she did. I give you half a dozen, two red, two yellow, two white. Can't do no better than that, can it? Can't do no better than that, can I? Put in some baby's breath. They love that. And fill it out with some fern. Nice. Or you can have the bouquet for $1. They? The young man asked, still smiling. My young friend, the flower vendor said, flicking his cigarette butt into the gutter and returning the smile. No one buys flowers for themselves in May. It's like a national law. You understand what I mean? The young man thought of Norma, her happy, surprised eyes, and her gentle smile, and he ducked his head a little. I guess I can do that, he said. Sure you do. What do you say? Well, what do you think? I'm gonna tell you what I think. Hey, advice is still free, isn't it? The young man smiled and said, unless it's the only thing left that is. You're damn tootin' it is, the flower vendor said. Okay, my young friend, if the flowers are for your mother, you get her the bouquet. A few jonquils, a few crocuses, some lily of the valley. She don't spoil it by saying, "Oh, Junior, I love them. How much do they cost? Oh, that's too much. You don't have enough. Not to the, not to throw your money around." The young man threw his head back and laughed. The vendor said, "But if it's your girl, that's a different thing, my son, and you know it. You bring her the tea roses, and she don't turn into an accountant. You take my meaning? Hey, she's gonna throw her arms around your neck." "I'll take the tea roses," the young man said, and this time it was the flower vendor's turn to laugh. The two men pitching nickels glanced over, smiling. "Hey, kid," one of them called. "You want to buy a wedding ring cheap? I'll tell you mine. I don't want to know more." The young man grinned and blushed to the roots of his dark hair. The flower vendor picked out 16 roses, snipped the stems a little, spritzed them with water, and wrapped them in a large conical spill. "Tonight's weather looks just like the way you'd want it," the radio said. "Fair and mild, temps in the mid to upper 60s, perfect for a little moon rooftop stargazing, if you're the romantic type. Enjoy, Greater New York, enjoy." The flower vendor scotch taped the seam of the paper spill and advised the young man to tell his lady that a little sugar added to the weather she put them in would preserve them longer. Or to the water she put them in would preserve them longer. I need to remember what I'm reading. "I'll tell her," the young man said. He had out a $5 bill. "Thank you." Just doing the job, my young friend," the vendor said, giving him $1.02. His smile grew a bit sad. "Give her a kiss for me." That sounds a little bit weird when you think about it. Why should our main character give his Give his woman a kiss for the flower vendor. Give her a kiss for the flower vendor. What? I just don't find I just don't like how some random person would say that. But okay, we're moving on. On the radio, the Four Seasons began singing Sherry. The young man pocketed his change and went on up the street, eyes wide and alert and eager, looking not so much around him at the life ebbing and flowing up and down Third Avenue as in word in ahead, anticipating. But certain things did impinge. A mother pulling a baby in a wagon, the baby's face comically smeared with ice cream. A little girl jumping rope and sing-songing out of rhyme. Betty and Henry up in a tree. Kissing. First comes love, then comes marriage. Here comes Henry with the baby carriage. Two women stood outside a washateria, smoking and comparing pregnancies. A group of men were looking in a hardware store window at a gigantic color TV with a four-figure price tag. A baseball game was on, and all the players' faces looked green. The playing field was a vague strawberry color, and the New York Mets were leading the Phillies by a score of 6-1 in the top of the ninth. Geez, I wonder who's going to win that game then. I'm just saying. When it's at the bottom of the ninth and the score is 6-1, either um, the Mets are going to win in dominant fashion, or the Phillies are somehow going to mount one hell of a comeback. Something's going to happen there. Anyway, he walked on, carrying the flowers, unaware that the two women outside the washateria had stopped talking for a moment and had watched him wistfully as he walked by with his paper of tea roses. Their days of receiving flowers were long over. He was unaware of a young traffic cop who stopped the cars at the intersection of 3rd and 69th with a blast on his whistle to let him cross. The cop was engaged himself and recognized the dreamy expression on the young man's face from his own shaven mirror, where he had often seen it lately. He was unaware of the two teenage girls who passed him going the other way and then clutched themselves and giggled. At 73rd Street he stopped and turned right. This street was a little darker, lined with the brownstones and walk-down restaurants with Italian names. 3 blocks down, a stickball game was going on in the fading light. The young man did not go that far. Half a block down, he turned into a narrow lane. Now the stars were out, gleaming softly, and the lane was dark and shadowy, lined with vague shapes of garbage cans. The young man was alone now. No, not quite. A wavering yowl rose in the purple gloom, and the young man frowned. It was some tomcat's love song, and there was nothing pretty about that. He walked more slowly and glanced at his watch. It was a quarter of 8 and Norma should be just. Then he saw her coming toward him from the courtyard, wearing a dark blue slacks and a sailor blouse that made his heart ache. It was always a surprise seeing her for the first time. It was always a sweet shock. She looked so young. Now his smile shone out, radiated out, and he walked past her. Norma, he said. She looked up and smiled, but as they drew together, that smile faded. His own smile trembled a little, and he felt a moment's disquiet. Her face over the sailor blouse suddenly seemed blurred. It was getting dark now. Could he have been mistaken? Surely not. It was Norma. I brought you flowers, he said in a happy relief, and handed the paper spill to her. She looked at them for a moment, smiled, and handed them back. Thank you, but you're mistaken, she said. My name is Norma. he whispered, and pulled the short-handled hammer out of his coat pocket where it had been all. Oh my! I just realized the plot twist. Oh my god! What? I just read this in the most normal voice I've ever had, and I just realized the plot twist. Norma, he whispered, and pulled the short-handled hammer out of his coat pocket where it had been all along. They're for you, Norma. It was always for you. All for you. She backed away, her face a round white blur, her mouth an opening black. Oh, a black O of terror. And she wasn't Norma. Norma was dead. And she had been dead for 10 years. And it didn't matter because she was going to scream, and he swung the hammer to stop the scream, to kill the scream. And as he swung the hammer, the spill of flowers fell out of his hand. The spill spilled and broke open, spilling red, white, and yellow tea roses beside the dented trash cans where cats made alien love in the dark, screaming in love, screaming, screaming. He swung the hammer and she didn't scream, but she might scream because she wasn't Norma. None of them were Norma. And he swung the hammer, swung the hammer, swung the hammer. She wasn't Norma, and so he swung the hammer, as he had done 5 other times. Some unknown time later, he slipped the hammer back into his inner coat pocket and backed away from the dark shadows sprawled on the cobblestones, away from the litter of tea roses by the garbage cans. He turned and left the narrow lane. It was full dark now. The stiffball players had gone in. If there were bloodstains on his suit, they wouldn't show. Not in the dark. Not in the soft late spring dark. And her name had not been Norma, but he knew what his name was. It was Love. His name was Love, and he walked these dark streets because Norma was waiting for him, and he would find her someday soon. He began to smile. A balance came into his step as he walked on down 73rd Street. A middle-aged married couple, sitting on the steps of their building, watched him go by, head cocked, eyes far away, a half smile on his lips. When he had passed by, the woman said, "How come you never left that way anymore?" "Huh?" "Nothing," she said, but she watched the young man in the gray suit disappear into the gloom of the encroaching night and thought that if there was anything more beautiful than springtime, it was young love. What a plot twist. Why, I'll be honest, you know what I was thinking of the very first, as soon as as soon as the guy brought out the fucking hammer, the very first thing that I was thinking of with that moment was the Japanese movie. Some of you may know this, some of you may not know this, but the very first thing that popped into my head was the 1999 Japanese movie known as Audition, which actually celebrated an anniversary last year because it came out in 1999 initially, and last year was 2024, so it celebrated a an anniversary last year, and I just knew that. I just realized that. But for those of you that don't know, Audition is about a man who either divorces or breaks up, or his significant other passes away or when something happens. And so what he decides to do by with some help from his friend is he does a fake audition, but in reality he's trying to find another woman to be in his he's trying to find another woman to date. And he finds this other woman to date. But without spoiling too much, I will say the woman has a dark thing that has this secret that he doesn't entirely know. We know about it by that point, but he doesn't. She has a dark. She is she is the type of woman that I would say this is sort of like the Japanese Fatal Attraction. I would say that much. I would probably give it like the Japanese version of Fatal Attraction if I could even go there. Because if you've watched Fatal Attraction, you know what that movie's about. You probably have seen Fatal Attraction more than you probably seen Audition, if you have seen Fatal Attraction, um, which is another interesting movie in myself. The only reason why I know about that movie is I've seen bits of it because it was on TV one time, uh, and it was referenced in the movie Sleepless in Seattle, where Tom Hanks' character tells the little boy, his son, like because of how he put it is where the little boy uh, thinks his father would go well with this one woman that's played by Meg Ryan, which would be one of their, as far as my knowledge goes, three movies that they worked together on, Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan. Um, but anyway, so the boy is like, why can't we go to New York? And Tom Hanks' character is like, there is no way that we are going on a plane to see a woman who could be some crazy sick lunatic. Didn't you see Fatal Attraction? You wouldn't let me. Well, I saw it. And it scared the shit out of me. It scared the shit out of every goddamn man in America. Literally word for word what he says in that moment. And to this day, I am surprised that they were able to get away with a PG rating with just that line. Like, that may have been like just a small line with a few cuss words in it, but just the fact that he was able to get away in a PG rated. But I can't really say too much about it because Home Alone kind of got away with it in itself. Because that one scene where Marv uh, loses his shoe, if you turn up the TV enough, you could hear him say, shit, and then he picks up his shoe. And that movie's PG rated. So I guess they were able to get away with it. But the difference is, Marv was like just kind of whispering it. Tom Hanks' character yelled it out. So, yeah, that's interesting. That second story instantly made me think of Audition. Instantly. Or, I guess if we want to go from a guy's perspective on that, Fear. Because I think it had, who did it have? It had Drew Barrymore as the main female character. I can't remember the male actor's name. I know he's a famous actor now, but I can't remember his freaking name though. But it was when he was younger, obviously. But yeah. Anyway, um, so that was the 11th part of Night Shift. Next time is the finale. So, like I said earlier, I'll be doing a poll about which book you guys want me to read after we finish this book. But before we do finish this book, we'll be reading the next part for The Hobbit. So, for now, that's going to be it for me here tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen, this is Forrest Walpole, signing off.